Support for Great Lakes Now update is provided by the Fred A. and Barbara M. Erb Family Foundation, the Joyce Foundation, the Ohio Byways Collection, Northeast Ohio Regional Sewer District, ArcelorMittal, the Generation Foundation, and by Cleveland Metro Parks. Great Lakes Now is a co-production of Detroit Public TV and WVIZ PBS Idea Stream.
Hi there, and thanks for joining us for Great Lakes Now. I'm Christy McDonald. It is one of the biggest problems facing the Great Lakes and the most publicized, Asian carp. How to keep them out of the Great Lakes was a big topic of conversation at Great Lakes Week here in Cleveland. It is a complicated battle involving science, studies, and politics. Just recently, environmental DNA belonging to silver carp was discovered in the Sandusky Bay in Lake Erie. But most of the focus is on Chicago and stopping the so-called superhighway for Asian carp by separating Lake Michigan from the Mississippi River Basin. Here on the Illinois River, about 30 miles south of Chicago, is ground zero of the latest invasive species debate, whether or not to spend untold billions of dollars separating the Great Lakes from the Mississippi River Basin.
We're approaching the electric barriers that have been in place since 2002.
Del Wilkins operates a barge business on the Illinois.
The fish barriers are working and that the controls were being adequate at this far and doing their function to stop the advancement of invasive species, not only from the inland waterways coming into the Great Lakes environment, but also from the Great Lakes environment going into the inland waterways.
Frankly, having that technology in place doesn't make me sleep better at night. It's a good interim solution. It does a good job of repelling fish, but we need something in the Great Lakes that we can bank on for generations to come. And I'm banking on the separation of the Great Lakes from the Mississippi River.
Debate over building a physical barrier which would interrupt commercial barge traffic started mainly because of this. Asian carp, the frenetic flying poster fish for all invasive species, on a seeming quest to scare anyone who encounters them out of their wits, if not their boats.
They're a real danger. These are big fish. These are oftentimes 60-pound fish, and there have been some scary and unfortunate instances where they've hit people, broken bones, knocked people unconscious.
As dangerous and scary as Asian carp can be above the water surface, they're even more devastating beneath it.
Underneath the water, Asian carp are great at eating. They can scoop up to 20% of their body weight out of the water per day, and what they do is they eat right at the base of the food web.
It's the fear of Asian carp's next destination that has galvanized advocates for separation.
They're swimming north towards the Great Lakes through the Mississippi River, the Illinois River, and they're coming very close to us here in Chicago.
And it is in Chicago where the proponents of separation would like this fish story to take a sharp turn, literally at the convergence of the Great Lakes and the Mississippi River.
Used to be that water flowed from the Chicago area into Lake Michigan. At around the turn of the 20th century, around 1900, the water was reversed so that now Lake Michigan drains into the Chicago River down to the Mississippi.
At the time, the reversal of the Chicago River, still considered one of the greatest engineering feats in American history, was necessary for a very good reason.
To protect the drinking water supply for the city of Chicago. It used to be that their waste was all flushed into Lake Michigan. Well, they wanted to separate their waste from their drinking water for obvious health reasons. And so the river was reversed.
So now you've got this free-flowing canal between the Great Lakes and the Mississippi River. Great for getting rid of Chicago's waste, great for transportation in the 19th century, but it's also opened up this highway for Asian carp to move up the Illinois River toward Lake Michigan.
So the idea is to build a permanent barrier to separate, to restore the natural divide, the natural watershed divide that existed prior to the 1900s.
For its advocates, the barrier would not only solve the invasive species problem, but also provide an opportunity to focus on improving the Chicago waterway itself.
It is not a modern waterway. It is not a modern transportation system. What we're talking about with this idea of a physical barrier is rethinking Chicago's waterway, modernizing it.
Increased property values, clean water, better recreation, more people on the river, and yes, grow commercial transportation in a way that makes sense for Illinois and Chicago.
We always need people who want to look forward, and there's absolutely no reason for us not to do so.
Kay Nelson represents an array of industries in the state of Indiana and has been engaged in Great Lakes issues for over 30 years.
My concern is that I've expressed multiple times in settings is that the general public has the impression that this is the fast fix to prevent the Asian carp from migrating into the Great Lakes. And it's not something that's going to happen within the next 18 to 24 months.
And other critical factors need to be considered before any barrier can become a reality, such as now dumping the treated wastewater and the combined sewer overflow discharges back into Lake Michigan, where Chicago residents get their drinking water. Meanwhile, Del Wilkins and thousands of others who work along the Chicago waterway are focused on making a living right now.
If we shut down locks or we separate a system, we're forced to have to shut down our operations. Because if we shut down operations, we're putting people out of work and we're losing jobs. We move coal, petroleum products, chemical industry products, road salt, ice control salt, sand, gravels, cement, steel, and steel byproducts. And right now we're moving upwards of 25 to 30 million tons annually within the greater Chicagoland area.
There's $16 billion worth of product that go through the waterway system.
Mark Beal represents the chemical industry in Illinois and is also chairman of Unlock Our Jobs, a group focused on keeping the Chicago waterway system open.
The folks who depend on the waterway system don't want the Asian carp in the Great Lakes. That's the last thing in the world we want. We want to be part of the solution. What we have said is we think there's a lot of ways to solve this issue short of separating the waterway system so that you cause economic harm to those folks that depend on it.
Now, when could the separation happen? How much could it cost? And who will make the decisions from here? Joining us now is Tim Eder. He's the executive director of the Great Lakes Commission, and Christy Meyer from the Ohio Environmental Council. Thank you both for being with us.
Thank you.
Thanks, Christy. It's good to be here.
So, Tim, let's talk. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, they're doing a study, and they're looking at several points of possible entry of Asian carp into the Great Lakes system. The Great Lakes Commission did a study focusing on the separation of the waterways, and is it actually possible? And your study found?
We find that it's feasible. With the cities initiative, the Great Lakes and St. Lawrence Cities Initiative, the states who I work for wanted to know, is it possible? How could it be done? And how could we do it in such a way that would protect those existing uses? The transportation, the commercial transportation, the use of the waterway for water quality, for treating discharges of pollution, and for flood protection. And we found that it could be done.
But you think that this is the prime way to keep Asian carp out of the Great Lakes system?
It's the best way to keep Asian carp out, but more in addition to that, Christy, we have to think about other species as well. We have to think about other species that could be coming up the Mississippi. We know that there's a fish called the snakehead in the Mississippi, and we also need to be concerned about species from the Great Lakes moving down to the Mississippi.
Ballpark figure of what a project like this would cost and how much time it would take to actually do the separation?
We did an estimate of the costs, and we found that it would cost up in the neighborhood of about $4.5 billion for the least expensive alternative. Could be more than that, but that's the one that makes the most sense.
Looking at a range of how high could it go?
It could go up to $9 billion.
A lot of focus, Christy, has been placed on Chicago and the separation there. But just a couple of weeks ago, we got news of environmental DNA found of silver carp, which is the ones that jump from the water that people have seen all that video about. Were you surprised when you heard about that?
I was shocked, worried. What I think after taking some time in letting it sink in, my first question is it juveniles? Do we have juveniles? Or do we have adults? If we have juveniles that are in the system, then I'll be really worried. Now, I think I told you last time I was on that some of the more conventional ways that they've been trying to find these fish haven't really been working. And so I really am hoping that ODNR, the Ohio Department of Natural Resources, is maybe learning from those problems that have occurred and adapting and using different ways potentially. But at the same time, I do think that a lot of focus should be on the Chicago area, and that we really do separate those two basins, because we can't wait any longer. If we don't know what's going on in Lake Erie right now, we need to move at the same pace. the Ohio Department of Natural Resources is looking at that, and I think we really need to keep pushing the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers to utilize the Great Lakes Commission study and to separate those two basins.
Well, we had an Asian carp panel here at Great Lakes today that I actually moderated, and we had someone from the Army Corps of Engineers on there, and it seems to be the big complaint here is time. But they've said, look, we have parameters of our study that we need to make sure that we cover all of our bases, and we're not going to be able to report to Congress until January of 2014.
Yep.
Is that too late, Tim?
No, I don't think so. If they can get the job done by 2014, let's face it, it's a very complex system, and there are a lot of uses and users that depend on it. And a metropolitan region of 9.5 million people have grown up around, and the city of Chicago is a great city, and they depend on the uses of that waterway. So reversing it and replumbing Chicago is not going to happen overnight, unfortunately. So if we can get the study done in 2014 and we can start construction and start moving quickly after that, we should be okay. We hope we will.
Kristy, have you found that the public has become very educated very quickly on the issue of Asian carp and other invasive species, but mostly Asian carp in the Great Lakes?
I think so. It was funny and very telling when a friend of mine from college, I called her to see how she was doing, and one of the first things she said to me was, "Wow, what about those Asian carp?" And I said, "Wow, you've really, you've been reading up a lot about it." My next door neighbor, I live outside of the Great Lakes Basin in Columbus, Ohio, and he said, "Oh, have you heard about those Asian carp that are moving up?" So I think a lot of people and a lot of traditional people that we wouldn't traditionally think about have been really becoming educated about this issue.
Yeah.
Tim, what's in place right now that is stopping the Asian carp from advancing into Lake Michigan?
Well, it's curious. The carp have not advanced for the last 5 years or so, and they don't quite understand exactly why.
So could you say that we're doing okay, or?
Well, I'd like to say that it's because of the electric barrier. The fact is that there is an electric fence, a barrier, that is providing a degree of protection. But the fish aren't actually up against the barrier yet. There is commercial netting and fishing that's going on. But it could also be a lack of adequate habitat for reproduction. They really don't know. But we know this. They're too close for comfort. They're too close to take a risk and take a chance with the Great Lakes, with a fishery and a resource as valuable as we have.
Kristy, I'm going to give the last word to you. We know that this eventually, the question of separation, if that is indeed an option that the U.S. Army Corps will put on the table for Congress, they're the ones that are going to have to make a decision. So there's going to be, I would assume, a public education and at least a lot of talk about this to make sure that people understand what we're up against.
I think, there's a really good network already now, and I think it will continue to grow until this really becomes that the Corps comes out with their study. And yes, it's going to take a huge undertaking of educating the public, but the public really wants that information. It's something that is in the headlines. It's something that's selling. People are constantly looking for that type of information. So I think what they really want to know is, how can I help? And when is this going to be solved? And certainly, having those conversations that it's a complex issue, is very difficult.
All right, Kristy, Meyer, Tim Eder, thanks so much for joining us on Great Lakes Now. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Kristy.
Thank you.
Well, the Great Lakes provide drinking water to millions. They provide recreation, and now they're part of a blue economy around the basin. Reduce, reuse, recycle, the motto of the green movement.
We've got our heads around the fact that there's a green economy, meaning a lot of money and new products to be made that are energy conservation oriented and certainly a lifestyle choice.
But now another color may just be the way the Great Lakes region can bank on our water. We're talking about the blue economy.
The blue economy is a catch-all for the ways water matters to our economic growth, by both marking us as a community and a region, in our Great Lakes case, that is celebrating and enjoying and special and attractive because of our water assets.
Special indeed. The Great Lakes contains 20% of the world's surface fresh water. But the blue economy is more than just creating tourist attractions. There's a lot of serious economics that go along with it.
If the Great Lakes is crucial for the Great Lakes states to produce economic output, which I think it is, it's probably not a big stretch to say a quarter of the economy or even more is dependent on the Great Lakes.
Perhaps the best way to think about the blue economy is to break it into 4 simple categories.
Water as a place definer, being on the water, access to water, clean water in your community for all the enjoyment and quality of life benefits is certainly a major one. Water as a new growing business opportunity. Clean water, water monitoring, water measuring, water treating, using water smarter. There is also tremendous water research, learning, problem solving, being the center of excellence at our great universities, the lifestyle and values. Again, people want to make a lifestyle decision to use water smarter and help save the planet.
Several cities, Milwaukee, Cleveland, Duluth, and even Macomb County in Michigan have already capitalized on this blue economy.
Every dollar that we invest in Great Lakes restoration has a 3-to-1 payoff in terms of the long-term economic growth, development from making the water available and all the increased value.
A value not just counted in dollars and cents. Portland is known for sustainability. San Francisco is known for being green. The blue economy could bring that kind of new identity to the more than 30 million people in the Great Lakes Basin.
They want to choose products. They want to be in communities that are involved in sustainable work and living, and they want to be involved in sustainable practices in their everyday lives. So the communities that are all about that are all about using water sustainably and having being good stewards of the planet, create a buzz and an environment that people want to choose to participate in.
When you talk about the Great Lakes, people automatically say, yes, they're beautiful, we enjoy them, but they don't necessarily believe they can do anything to help in terms of lake health. Joining me now is Patty Burkholz, the director of the Michigan Office of the Great Lakes, with more on being a Great Lakes steward. Patty, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you. Great to
So
be here.
you have 5 things that we can do to be Great Lakes steward. And the first one was become Great Lakes literate. What do you mean by that?
Well, people need to know and need to do a little research, not a whole lot, but a little research about the Great Lakes, about their importance, first of all, but then secondly, about what causes things like algal blooms, like the other invasive species that we're starting to see now. Dealing with some of the issues that they want more knowledge about, but need to do a little bit of research. And it's very easy to do. We have a Great Lakes website. We have a Michigan Great Lakes website from the Office of the Great Lakes, as do several of our other state partners around the basin. So it's easy to become literate on Great Lakes issues, particularly the lakes themselves, but also what you can do.
I like the second one you have is connect with nature.
Right.
How can we do that?
The best way to connect with nature is to spend some time on and around the lakes, taking walks in our state parks, in our federal parks, spending time with your family, hiking the trails and biking. There are so many opportunities. Some of them are as close as almost your backyard, depending on where you live. Some of them are a little bit further away, but they're great for us independently to kind of get our heads together, but also to take our families, our little kids, all the way up to our adult children.
And that seems to be an easy one to do, to connect with nature. But this one, the third one, make wise choices in landscape.
Yes.
Does that start to get a little difficult for people?
Well, it's not as difficult as it sounds. We do still have some invasive species, plants that are being sold in some nurseries, in some communities around the Great Lakes. So we need to know whether they're invasive or not. And the basic question is, when you go to a store, when you go to a nursery to buy something, you know, whether it's that beautiful shrub or the large tree or even the flowers, is to ask the people who work there to make sure that they're not invasives. Because believe me, if you plant an invasive in your yard and it takes off, you're going to have a hard time either controlling it or getting rid of it.
All right, your fourth one is be part of the solution.
And all of the things that we've already talked about leading up to that, be part of the solution. If you have some basic knowledge about the Great Lakes, about our ecosystem, then you can find ways where you can be part of the solution. We have the Great Lakes sweep where we do across the Great Lakes, all of the states within the Great Lakes do a beach sweep on Saturday next week. And you can get involved in that. You can get involved in your local community, whether it's helping out at your local parks, helping do cleanups, helping with the education programs. They can always use volunteers when they do education and outreach. And it's a great family activity.
And just take a little bit of time. So the last one is get involved to protect and restore natural places.
And that is something that is easy to do also. Look around your communities. Most of us have places in our communities that we want to see restored, whether it's one of our lakes, one of our rivers or streams, and they're always looking for volunteers. And volunteer doesn't necessarily mean you always need to be out there working, but you can give of time and effort in your home, making phone calls, connecting with other people, helping outreach and education. So there are many ways that that everyone can help at every level, every age group, in every community. Lots of different and variety of experiences that you can all enjoy but learn from and help save the Great Lakes for our future generations.
All right, be empowered. Thanks so much, Patty Burkholz, for
you.
joining us. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Well, you know, drought continues to grip nearly half of the country and has devastated crops from the Great Plains to here in Ohio. But for Lake Erie, the lack of rain has had a side benefit. Less stormwater runoff from farms means less algae blooms. But what happens when the rains return? Reporter Ed Moore found a possible solution.
Nobody likes to point fingers at American farmers.
Agriculture's had a real wide berth in America for a lot of years. But things have changed.
Nor has it ever been popular to single out excessive fertilizer use as the main cause for Lake Erie's algal woes. But today's agricultural practices leave little doubt and few choices for the farmer.
The strength of fertilizers, the application rates, the need to turn crops over faster or more crops in a year, all require real aggressive positions for farmers.
This is Quasar Energy's founder and president, Mel Kurtz.
And the result sometimes is a compromise in the environment.
Mel comes from a long line of Kurtzes who know a thing or two about keeping soil fertile.
For years, the family operated the Akron compost facility, and the responsibility was to take all of their sewage, sludge, solids and convert them to compost.
So he understands all too well the nexus between food production and lake health.
People call it nutrient management. Most of us call it nutrient mismanagement. Phosphorus and nitrogen are what feed the algae in these lakes. So you add sun to the plant life that's already in the lakes or streams with nutrient-rich phosphorus and nitrogen, voila, we have lakes you can't use. We have lakes with toxic algae that kill animals, fish, and are harmful to humans.
But for him, fertilizer and stormwater management are surface problems. At the root of it all is the lack of alternatives for those actually getting their hands dirty.
If you tell a farmer you can't use phosphorus because there's going to be runoff and you have no proposed alternative, what's he do? Okay, so he stops growing his crops and we stop eating. That doesn't work so well.
Behind Mel is his alternative. A solution not only for farmers and cleaning up Lake Erie, but an answer for sustainable energy and controlling greenhouse gas emissions. It's called an anaerobic biodigester.
It's like a cow's stomach.
This is Quasar's plant operator, James Robinson. James alone runs the bioenergy plant here in East Cleveland.
We take in organic waste and we run it through a process of anaerobic digestion to create methane gas. And the methane gas is then used to create electricity and also power vehicles.
Up to 250 homes get their electricity from the methane created by bacteria as it devours all the waste that we'd normally shove down a trash compactor, flush away, or dump in a landfill.
It could be byproducts from food manufacturing, could be manure from farms, it could be fats, oils, and grease, sewage, sludge, municipal waste streams, could be from baseball parks, football stadiums.
In fact, this tanker is offloading grease waste from a couple of well-known big box stores. But electricity and CNG is only part of the story. What the bacteria can't convert into methane gas gets processed into fertilizer. Fertilizer without phosphorus, a key ingredient of harmful algae blooms.
We've been working on for over a year to separate the phosphorus from the liquid stream that allows us to take the phosphorus where we need it and stop putting it on where we don't need it.
Along with conservation and restoration programs, farmers now have another tool to combat algae feeding runoff.
The cow eats the grain, the manure comes to the digester, the food came from the cow, and now we're going back to digesting it, and the nutrients that went through the cycle already is going to return to that cycle again.
From fertilizer to food to waste and back to fertilizer again, all in one perfectly sustainable loop. A possible solution for America's growing need for more energy, fresh water, and food.
Next time you go to the grocery store and you get those big, beautiful vegetables or fruits or stuff like that, it may be a product of quasar bioenergy.
And that was Ed Moore reporting. Just one interesting example of a new way of doing things. And that is going to do it for Great Lakes Now. Thanks so much for joining us from Cleveland. For more on Great Lakes Week, just head to greatlakesnow.org. I'm Christy McDonald. We'll see you next time.
Take some time for a two-lane adventure. Wander along the shores of Lake Erie. Discover whistle-stop towns with a canal-era past. Take in the beauty of Big Sky Days, Rolling Hill Farms, the serenity of Amish country. From big city lights to charming riverbank towns. Experience Ohio's culture and history, one byway at a time. Ohio Byways, 27 paths to discover our state. Learn more at ohiobyways.com.